person in attendance. So I would like to thank our guest panelists. We do have a couple students that will be joining us later. With Jessica Skelton, tobacco specialist with Hamilton County Public Health. So thank you very much for your attendance. Lauren Hauschel, a public ally working as a prevention specialist with Prevention First. Dr. Angelica Hardy, Vice President of Health Strategy with the American Heart Association. And thank you, Dr. Hardy. We had an opportunity also, myself and several staff members from Princeton, and we met with some unbelievable, dedicated people over at Mercy, Dr. Noyes, and many others. And so it was great. Myself, high school principal, director of secondary education, Dr. Hawkins, as well as Dr. Jameson and Dr. Phillips were there. So it was a wonderful learning experience to kind of develop deeper knowledge about this epidemic, terrible epidemic we have with vaping. And last but not least, Ollie Moore, our Safety and Security Director with Princeton City Schools. So we certainly appreciate everybody for coming out tonight, and I'll turn it over to Jessica. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So thank you all for attending today. So we're just gonna kind of go ahead and get started. So to kind of address why we're here today. So we're here, like he said, to discuss vaping and the different things affecting the youth in our community nowadays. So we'll go ahead and get started with Dr. Hardy kind of explaining what exactly nicotine is and how it can affect different people.
Right? Okay. Hi, everyone. Oh, maybe? Hello. You good? All right. Okay. So, oh, there I am. Now, move it further away. How are we now? Am I yelling at y'all this evening? You're up now, so here we go. So nicotine actually is a stimulant, and that's, well, let's start before nicotine. Let's get to tobacco, right? So before there were e-cigarettes, there were cigarettes. Cigarettes come from tobacco, which is a plant. We know that because about 20 miles south of this, we're the capital of tobacco, right? And tobacco is the plant in which nicotine then lives, and cigarettes originally have little traces of nicotine in them, right? So when they say they're taking out the nicotine from substances and only having tobacco, most often there are still some nicotine traces in a lot of our tobacco products. But nicotine itself is a stimulant and is extremely addictive just in nature. It's a chemical, and we become then dependent on such chemical. I think kind of why we're here today, and one of the big reasons, nicotine in adults is bad, but nicotine in youth is even worse. We do not have the immense amount of research and really programming tailored towards how to treat, how do we really address the youth in vaping and the nicotine addiction that comes along with that.
As she said, there we go. So nicotine definitely affects adults and youth differently. So real quick, before we move on to youth, can you tell us some of the ways that nicotine can actually affect adults? So maybe the addictive nature of it affecting adults?
Yeah, so we often see blood pressure increase, we see heart rate, we see a lot of also behavioral with adults. There's also the myth, I think a lot of mythbusters that come around with cigarettes, you think that smoking can actually make you lose weight, but it's actually the exact opposite. But it's a stimulant, so people feel as if when they stop smoking that they lose weight, when actually that isn't really true. You're just eliminating the stimulant, and then most often you then gain the weight back. But those are things that people use, that nicotine substance really affects adults in that way. You want me to go into youth a little bit too? When we go to youth, we still are really learning how it's affecting youth. We see most with behaviors. So when teens are no longer smoking e-cigarettes, and I like to use e-cigarettes as instead of vaping, and we try to really put those two together because it's so important to understand that vaping sounds cool, right? It's not cigarettes. We don't smoke cigarettes, we vape. But they are the same thing. Electronic cigarettes and vaping are the same thing. So we try to use that language interchangeably to make sure we're making everyone aware that this is e-cigarettes, this is dangerous for our youth, and to be determined for adults. And I know we'll get to that in a little bit. But for nicotine within youth, we really have to worry about behaviors and how our youth will be then addicted for long periods of time to such substance.
That is very true. So a lot of times with youth, so they may be addicted to this product or, any substance that they're addicted to. A lot of times for youth, you see that through a different way than adults. You'll see depression, withdrawal. Maybe kids will stop doing their after school activities. Their grades might start falling in schools and things like that. So it's not something that it's really easy to see in a youth unless you know what is actually going on in their life. That's why we really recommend people, talking to their friends, talking to their kids and things like that if these things start to occur, because it's not necessarily a normal thing for kids to all of a sudden withdraw from their activities, withdraw from their friends, and different things like that. So we really want to make sure that that gets out there, that people recognize these signs of nicotine addiction and then are able and are provided with the resources needed to address that addiction. So right now, we do want to address that vaping or e-cigarette use has greatly increased among youth. So a few years back, the rates increased dramatically once new products hit the shelves. So this was because of different types of products released to the public that had very attractive things to youth. So attractive flavors such as fruit and menthol and a wintergreen and different types of candy flavors, those attracted youth. So youth were very much interested in trying them. And then, so that coupled with the different marketing strategies and things like that nationwide, that really targeted the youth. And I'll let Dr. Hardy explain a little bit more about the marketing, the advertisement, and how it targets youth.
Yeah, I think that's what scares me the most when we think as a public health professional that has been in this field, what we're up against is big vape is what we call it at AHA, and that is really understanding that companies that have billions of dollars, billion-dollar industries, and we're working against them, that's investing $57 million in 2019. I wanted to make sure I had the number right, just on TV and I don't know what they call it, like not cable, but necessarily like the social media ads that come in between the YouTube videos, that. Those commercials that happen on a lot of these streaming services, 57 million in 2019. In comparison to we're beginning to work on our kind of marketing combating big vape. So when we talk about, and you see all these quit lying and what that means, that's what we're talking. We're talking about quit lying, stop focusing on sending us bubblegum flavors. I've seen Jolly Rancher, I've seen Nerds, I've seen all of these flavors that are targeted to youth. I'm not necessarily, well, I do like candy, but it's not targeted to me. It's really targeted towards those flavors that youth want to try and they don't think it's anything bad and I can try it once, but there's so much nicotine in those little pods and different things that most often we then see our teens attracted to these different flavors. So that is why it's kind of like quit lying. Stop telling us that you're not targeting us when we know that you are. These are directed towards youth. They even use, younger people in the ads. They're literally trying to address youth to get them addicted to nicotine.
No, and that's completely true. So these flavors that have gotten these kids interested in trying these for the first time with that high nicotine content, especially some of them use what's called nicotine salts, which is the ability to get more nicotine packed into the same amount in volume-wise. So with that, these kids are getting addicted off of just using the device one or two times. They may hang out with their friends one evening and pick up an e-cigarette or a vape, and then from that point on, they're now addicted, and they feel like they need it. So when a child or a youth doesn't fully understand the signs of addiction, they have difficulty combating that and saying no, just with peer pressure and everything else going on in just a normal adolescent life, it is very difficult. So when we have that happening, a lot of times, of course, kids spend a lot of time in school and a lot of time at after-school activities, so then those devices end up getting brought into the school system. And Ali, if you wouldn't mind, could you go into kind of what you've seen in the school system here, either in Princeton or what you've heard around the actual community?
Absolutely. Again, my name is Ali Moore, Director of Security. This year, we've seen about 15 or so incidents that involve smoking. That may include vaping, that could include other things, but we've seen about 15 of them between our 6 to 12 campus, which is a slight increase from last year. But I do definitely agree with Dr. Hardy as the marketing and the flavors and those things have been kind of targeted towards kids. They do feel like I'm not really smoking. I'm not really doing any harm to my body. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that we let our students know what the consequences will and could be if you are caught vaping or smoking at school. It's a violation of our code of conduct, and our administrators do a great job of enforcing that, but students do face a suspension for that. However, that's just half of what will happen. The students will need to be enrolled in prevention education classes. Our administrators do a great job of making sure that when we talk to the parents, part of coming back to Princeton City Schools is your child, he or she, must be a part of prevention education classes. Again, we want to make sure that the student, if they're involved in that social setting again, whether it be at school or at home with their friends, they make a better decision, and hopefully they choose not to vape or smoke.
Yes, that's very true. And I was just going to introduce Lauren to discuss a little bit of the importance behind prevention education.
So in this case, we know that people that are regular nicotine users often start before the age of 18. And so it's important to put a lot of emphasis on young people. So start having those conversations surrounding any kind of nicotine use, whether that be cigarette, e-cigarettes, and talk about that from an early age and provide kids with accurate information, refusal skills, and just encourage them to make informed decisions about their own health. One thing that's really proven effective for us is youth-to-youth prevention. So kids are more likely to listen to other people their age and their peers rather than an authority figure. We keep in mind that the evidence is shown to be effective, and we incorporate that into any trainings or lessons that we have. So staying away from scare tactics and encouraging schools to do so is also important. So the goals of these lessons is to address some of the common misconceptions around vaping or e-cigarettes, provide people with the correct information, like the contents of them, the effects, other ingredients, not just nicotine, that could have effects on health, and any new information that's coming out all of the time, and how that can affect the body and adolescent brain. And another thing is, I guess, addressing media literacy and helping them recognize when they are being targeted by advertisements. Overall, we just want to provide them with the knowledge and skills to make the best decisions for their own well-being and to prevent nicotine addiction in all stages of their life. And we want to provide resources for kids that already do have a nicotine addiction. So there are some resources that exist, like My Life, My Quit. I don't know if anybody else can speak to others, but yeah.
Sorry. So yeah, there's other also programs like Catch My Breath, which is CBS. There's some in Texas. There's Aspire that's like gamified, where we are really seeing that education push, where we're making sure that, and schools are doing a great job of really looking to how do we educate our youth, because what happens, or what's previously happened, is when we see students vaping or smoking e-cigarettes, we are suspending them and expelling them. And most often they're then leaving and going to smoke or vape more. And then we're trying to get them to quit, but really there's not nicotine treatment for youth at that young age. There's no patches, there's no gum that's really approved for youth to use to stop them from being addicted to nicotine. So it's really important that we're not penalizing. I'm so great the school district is doing an awesome job of really investigating on how do we work with our youth to really combat this issue, because it's so important, and there's not a lot of research yet. AHA is investing $20 million this year on just research for youth in vaping and what this is going to do long term, because we're behind. Is what happens when new things are created in public health and other fields. We're working to combat them, and somebody was working on this 10 years ago, but we're here now, and we're making sure we're making a huge investment in that. So it's happening on the research end, but also on the policy end, where we're investing in school policy at the local level. There have been cities and counties, and the state obviously passed Tobacco 21. So if you're before last December, so September 18? October, thank you. Too many dates. October 2019, the state of Ohio passed Tobacco 21. And then December of 2019, the federal law passed. The difference, we're local, which is great. We're in Ohio. We have where we're working to have tobacco retail licenses locally to really not penalize youth when it comes to them smoking. So we don't want a child to get arrested or given a ticket or anything if they are caught smoking. We want that to be on the retailer to make sure youth are not smoking. And I'll ask Jessica, because I don't know the stat off the top of my head, what's the stat of if a child does not smoke by the age of 18? I think that's really powerful for our youth, the likelihood of them smoking in the future. I think those are really powerful.
Well, a couple of things we like to say is this is why prevention works. So the majority of people who are currently addicted to any sort of tobacco product were addicted by the age of 21. So that's 95% of all tobacco users currently, and that's by the age of 21. So 99% are addicted by the age of 25. So by raising the age limit to 21, we were able to get those products away from high schoolers who would be tempted to try them, wanting to hang out with their friends, peer pressure, bored on a Saturday night with no studying to do, something like that. So we were able to get it away to the 21-year-olds. So if you're able to get past the age of 25, there's roughly a 99% chance that you're not going to become addicted to a tobacco product in your lifetime. That is the goal. So 21 gets us 95% of the way there, and then with prevention education, talking to your kids, implementing tobacco-free school policies, as well as different policies addressing advertising and targeting, that can help get people to above the age of 25, and then you dramatically decrease your risk of ever becoming addicted to a tobacco product. I know one of the things we do here in Hamilton County, especially at Princeton as well, we will actually go into the schools and provide all of the education needed, especially on vaping devices and nicotine addiction and e-cigarettes, to the students, while also training the teachers to then give the lessons in the future. So these teachers are now trained, they have the resources, the connections such as Catch My Breath, as well as working with Prevention First, to provide this education to students to make sure that they have the information that they need. So the main point with prevention is definitely providing the information, busting the myths, asking questions and answering questions for the kids. Because the one thing that you'll never hear me say is I'm not pro-tobacco and I'm not anti-tobacco, I'm pro-informed decision making. Because in the end, the only person who ends up making the decision whether or not they're going to pick up that tobacco product, that that vape or that e-cigarette, is the kid. So we have to keep that in mind. So, penalizing them by expelling them or suspending them is not always going to be the answer. And more often than not, it's not the answer. But that's why working with school districts and things like that is so important, to make sure that these policies are in place to prevent these types of things from happening. But then those who are affected get the assistance and the help that they need to get off of those devices and off of that very addictive substance. And then, as Dr. Hardy mentioned as well, Ohio did recently pass the state tobacco 21 law. That one does have a few different stipulations than the federal law, so it does actually supersede or it overrides the federal law. So here in Ohio, we have something slightly different, which is really great. So we try not to penalize the people who are trying to purchase the products, educate the retailers, provide signs for everybody to be able to see, and then really promote in the end tobacco education and prevention education along with Prevention First in the school districts themselves. And then I think the only other thing we wanted to really address is there are some other approaches that community members can really help us with. Just you as a general parent, a community member, somebody who wants to get out in their community and help out. Anybody, no matter your organization or your school, you're definitely a benefit to this cause. So that is, going out and advocating for tobacco-free policies in your school district, maybe where your kid goes to school, advocating for tobacco-free parks. So a lot of people have small children, and when you go to a park, those aren't smoke-free, they aren't tobacco-free. So there are a lot of instances where you have very young children that are playing at these parks that are then exposed to nicotine and tobacco products very early on. And even if they're not necessarily affected health-wise, they're affected, just because they see people who they may view as a role model using these products. And we really want to keep that in mind as well. So adults, a lot of times, whether you realize it or not, or a bigger brother, you're a role model for your younger siblings, for your kids, things like that. You're the ones who kind of set the example for them to make choices later in life. So if they see somebody consistently using a tobacco product, they may think it's normal. And then it gets back to being normalized, and they feel okay picking it up, and they feel like it'll be accepted, which in the end can harm them later in life. So with that said, I want to open up the panel. Does anybody have anything else they would like to add?
All right, so I tricked everyone when I came up here, and I put on a vaping device. I don't know if anyone knows, but I'm actually wearing a watch right now that's actually not an Apple Watch, but this is actually a vape. So I think it's really important to like really think about where these devices, I know everyone's like, it's like a magic trick, y'all. But I think it's really important. It's not, sorry, I'm not checking kids, but Apple Watches, I'm so sorry. But things like this are really discreet. The industry, when I talk about marketing and really attracting and really attacking youth with these devices, this is how. When you make something so discreet that someone doesn't even know that it's a device, we have different devices actually out there. Oh, we have them in here now, but we'll put them back out when we're done. There's a, you want to model it? Yeah, let's do it. It's just, sorry, Jessica. This is a hoodie that is actually have, the strings of the hoodie is actually a vape, so you just put your vape pen in it. So when I say with tracting, this is not, they say this is built for adults, it's not for youth. But if you're an adult, why would you need to hide your vape in your hoodie string, right? So when we think about what's happening, and then there's a backpack, thanks Vanna. There's a backpack that kind of looks like the Camelback or Camelback, but really it you're supposed to put a vape device on the other end of it. So really thinking about why the vape community is doing this to our youth, but also being able to identify when it's happening and making sure that it's known. That's all I have.
No, thank you for showing those. I think the watch is one of the most astounding things to see. More often than not, you'll never see that pointed out that it's a vaping device. So a lot of people just don't even think it's a thing. They don't even know to look for it. And that happens a lot with, pretty often right now, Juul is recognized. It looks like a flash drive. Some people may recognize it, whether or not they realize it actually is a Juul. But there's ones that are pens that look and write like a pen, and it's actually a vape or an e-cigarette. And there's ones that look like highlighters, and there's so many different devices out there that are clearly targeting youth. And then they're able to do things, such as color coordinate with their outfit. They're able to put, their school logos on things. So it's, again, falling back to that peer pressure, that stress, that wanting to fit in with your peers and your friends and, just kind of trying to look cool, so to speak. And then they're able to use these devices to do that. So I know right now, we have discussed a lot of different things here on this panel. We're just trying to really touch on all the different topics that have been brought up over the past few months and years regarding vaping or e-cigarettes. So right now, we would just like to open up the floor to see if anybody here in person has any questions that they would like to ask. Please feel free to come up to the mic, and then following that, we'll go ahead and address any questions that may have been submitted online. Does anybody have any questions currently? Okay, I am going to go check the computer here to see if there's any questions. Trisha. Oh. Oh, okay. Okay, and actually for the panel, can I go ahead and have the two youth volunteers who are going to come up, Mackenzie and Tatiana? Please welcome Mackenzie and Tatiana to the panel. So these fine young ladies have offered to come up here and assist us with the panel tonight, and they are just kind of here to provide some youth guidance. If any kids have any questions, any youth have any questions, or if any parents have any youth-related questions. We just like having people here who really, know what they're talking about, and they definitely know what they're talking about when it comes to youth. Okay, so the first question that looks like it was submitted is, I know other people or adults who vape. Is vaping worse than cigarettes, better, or the same? So this is actually a really good question.
Really good question.
Dr. Hardy, do you want to take this question?
Oh, thank you.
No problem.
So this is definitely one of my, oh gosh, I got louder. I will say favorite questions, but the question that I think is in the media around a lot, because you hear that e-cigarettes is better than cigarettes, right? You think, well, I'm not smoking cigarettes, it's not as bad. I'd like to break that question up into two different sectors. For adults, most often you see, well, I stopped smoking real cigarettes, now I'm smoking e-cigarettes. That's me, lessening the smoke. That is not proven to be true at all. Studies do not show e-cigarettes as a cessation. There is not enough research to say that it is cessation, so the FDA does not recommend it as a nicotine treatment or any type of thing. So cigarettes and e-cigarettes for adults, I think you have to separate it because we do research not on youth, right, and then on the adults. It has not been proven to be a cessation resource or to be better than cigarettes. We know even though it does not have all the time the same amount of tobacco, those levels vary. You actually can look on the e-cigarette cartridges to see what's in there. Some even have no nicotine, but I use air quotes as I mentioned earlier because some can have no nicotine, but then there's still traces of nicotine in the product, right? So just thinking about that. And then when you go over to talk about youth, we definitely have no evidence on youth and e-cigarettes. 10 years ago, they didn't exist, right? They were still coming up with e-cigarettes. So the research on that has not been proven to be true. And what we do know, and what I always say is like, you don't put anything into your body. You don't want to inhale anything that is not natural. Nothing should be going into your lungs but air, oxygen. That's all that you should be breathing. All of these aerosols that are not processed through any federal agency. I mean, we use these bodies of work because they're evidence-based. And until we have evidence-based research to say that aerosols and stuff are safe to go in your lungs, but we know that's not true, right? We know that's not going to happen, to say we should breathe aerosols because that's not how we breathe. That's not natural. But until that research comes out, I say do not put anything into your lungs that is not oxygen.
Thank you for that answer. And that's one thing I really want to touch on. If you've ever heard of a vape or an e-cigarette, you're most likely hearing it referred to as a vape, when that is a shortened form of the word vapor. So when you hear vapor, you're automatically going to think water vapor. And that's when people get misled basically by the word vapor. They think vapor, water vapor, oh, okay, it's just water, it's safe. It's not going to harm me, Well, water vapor is not what's coming out of these devices. As Dr. Hardy mentioned, that is what's considered an aerosol. So that is like this gaseous state filled with tiny particles is the easiest way to put it. And it's those particles that get stuck deep into your lungs that cause damage. So most recently, I'm sure you have heard of what's called, referred to commonly as EVALI, or electronic or vaping associated lung injury. So that is what was causing many of the issues previously regarding vaping devices or e-cigarette devices. So that is one thing I really want to mention. And as she touched on, these devices and these products are not FDA regulated. Therefore, there is no requirement for these e-juices or these devices to put in their actual ingredients. As she led to previously, these devices don't actually report, these liquids and these nicotine e-liquids do not report actually necessarily their correct ingredients. So there's been numerous times when the CDC has taken these products off the shelf, tested them to see their nicotine content or their other ingredient content, and they've come back with much higher nicotine levels than they've reported, or much even lower nicotine levels than they've reported that's actually in the actual liquid. So that is one thing to keep in mind. There is no requirement for them to tell you necessarily what's in the actual liquid if you are using these devices. I think that's everything I can think of to say right there for that.
It makes me think of like when you have, like we have to put the ingredients in our food, right? That's what the FDA regulates. But no one's telling these companies to put the ingredients of what's in the pods. Like just imagine putting something in your body, ingesting something that you don't know the ingredients of. We like to look, I'm wearing my AHA hat. Like, you want to look at your labels. It's like looking at the nutrition label on your food and your pack, everything that comes. Like, it's the same thing. You're ingesting that in your body, so we don't know what's inside of these products. And I think that's the scary thing when we see all of these articles and these news that come out with youth that are passing away from EVALI and really just having these detrimental health effects from it. We just don't know.
And that is I think the main takeaway from that entire statement is we just don't know. It's just so much unknown right now, especially when it involves youth. And youth are the ones who are at most risk. They're the ones that, their brain isn't fully developed. They may not have those inhibitions, that adults would normally have when they're coming to using these devices and things like that. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next question really quick. So one of the questions is, how can you combat peer pressure when it comes to vaping? Would Tatiana or Mackenzie like to answer that for me? So mainly just kind of how are some strategies that either you or your friends have used or that you know of that really are kind of effective when it comes to youth, and if you have maybe a friend or a peer who asks you if you want to use their device?
Hopefully you can hear me, but I would just say, like, stick to your own morals, and that's like with all things in life. So just stick to what you believe in. If you strongly believe that it's not right and you feel like the effects will be bad for you and just simply how you were raised, just know, like, it's okay to lose one friendship instead of losing your own morals. So just stick to what you believe in and just move on with your life.
For me personally, I want to be a teacher, and I know like all my history is going to be checked and everything I do on all my decisions, and that's a big motivator. Is I have things I want to do in my future, and I don't want to be stopped because I made a dumb decision in high school.
That's actually a really good point you bring up, because one of the things that's happening in a lot of organizations and businesses nowadays is they're putting into place tobacco-free policies. So even for myself, and I'm sure a few other people here on the panel, we are not allowed to be tobacco users at our current position. So I myself, if I all of a sudden became a tobacco user, I would actually be let go from my current position if I did not choose to decide to quit tobacco products. A lot of county officials and things like that and city employees also have that same regulation where they cannot be a tobacco user, and if they are a tobacco user, most of the time there's fines involved. So you may be fined from your health insurance company or your actual business or job. So when you're Tatiana or Mackenzie's age, so they're seniors in high school and they're getting ready to go out into the workforce, maybe part-time with college or full-time, that is something that could dramatically affect their life if they graduate high school and they're a full-time tobacco user, or they're, vaping or using an e-cigarette a couple pods a day. They're no longer going to be able to get positions at certain organizations and businesses. Not to mention, of course, how it's going to affect their health by beginning to use these products so early on in life. Another question that's coming in is, let me see, they're still writing.
Can I talk about flavors really quick?
Please,
the recent
please
flavor.
do.
So I don't know if anyone has recently heard that we banned flavors. I don't know if anyone had read that in the media and said that we banned flavors. And I think it's really important because, you see things on Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok. I just learned what TikTok is, y'all. So I just wanted to tell you guys that. So TikTok or any of those things, you see articles or you learn new things, and then you only see like a paragraph. The federal government banned flavors. That's not a problem anymore. When you actually read the actual bill and what it says, it bans flavors, but only non-disposable flavors, right? So the disposable flavors are still fair game, meaning ones that you can just throw away after you use them is a go. They ban the ones that you can keep forever and ever and ever and ever. The important part about that is now they're making the disposable flavors basically larger. So you are getting ones that would have 50 hits or puffs in the disposable flavors. Now, most recently, I saw one for 1,000 hits or puffs, 2,000 hits or puffs, or whatever they call it. So that's what we're talking about. They're literally marketing it to continue to grow. So it's like, we banned flavors, but you didn't ban all flavors, and you only just banned flavors from non-disposable ones. So thinking about how the market is literally transforming as policies and procedures are put into place. So just making sure, I won't say you have to, if you want to read the policy, I would love that. But if you don't, you could just ask us or just look for more information and more detail, because on the surface level, it seems that we're good to go. But when we really dig deep, we understand that there's just so many more complexities.
And that's very much so the case with the new flavor ban. Just to touch on it a little bit more. So as she stated, they did ban any type of refillable pod. So that means, like, if Juul was actually refillable, they would have banned it. Juul is technically not refillable. There's just ways to do it that has unfortunately made it very wide on YouTube. So things like that are not banned. You can add any flavor you want. You can still buy the individual juices that are different flavors to put into these devices. Most of the time it's by tampering with the actual device, though. And it also did not do any type of banning towards what's referred to commonly as a mod device. So these are the ones that have separate tanks and cartridges that are not disposable, but they do not come refilled. Or refilled as in, like, it doesn't come with the actual juice with it usually. So the only thing that ban actually did was ban what's called refillable pod devices. So these are ones that have that exact same pod as like a Juul, but you take it off and actually it's made to be refilled. That's the only thing that actually banned. So unfortunately, the most common devices such as Juul was not even touched. So there are still, like she said, these companies that are taking advantage of that and then now creating disposable devices with like 3 or 4 in a pack that look dead on either a pack of Black and Milds or a pack of Swisher Sweets. And they come in the same flavors such as fruit, grape, mixed fruit, and you just buy them in a pack, you use them until they're gone, and then you throw it away. So that's something that we really want to keep an eye on and make sure that you're educating, either your friends, your family, your kids on that these are real things, and now they don't even have to worry about charging them. So that's really something to keep in mind, that now they don't even have to worry about trying to plug it into their computer in the middle of class. They'll just throw it away when it's finished. So it's definitely something to keep an eye out as well. And then the next question that just came in is, can anyone help direct me to some more information of how vaping affects the brain and the body physiologically, especially with concussions and also possible increase in recovery time from surgeries? I think I'll let Dr. Hardy address part of that.
Give it all to me.
Yes.
Wait, can we go first? First one was what? Brain?
So how vaping affects the brain and the body physiologically?
So I think we kind of touched on that earlier, but we talked about how it behavior, mood swings, depression, anxiety. I mean, it can be a rampant. It's different with everyone. Everyone's brain is different. So that one's can be various different behaviors. Also, we've seen blood pressure increase, heart rate increase, long term. I wouldn't say that I know the details about how after surgery. I'm a PhD, not an MD, not gonna act like I know the details on that part.
Well, it is, nicotine itself is a vasoconstrictor, so it does usually increase your recovery time needed or anytime after any type of surgery. So that is something to take into account. That's why most doctors, when they have you going into surgery, they will ask that you quit smoking, usually a few weeks beforehand, but that's also very difficult for somebody who is a full-time smoker as well. So that's something to keep into account, definitely, for sure.
I also just wanted to add that YouTube is your friend, and there are some really good YouTube videos that can like visually describe it. I know there are different ways of learning. That was one of the ones that described it best to me. So yeah, just Google that, find it on YouTube, but watch a reputable source. Don't watch one from a vape shop. Yeah, not from Juul, but yeah, that's all I had to say.
No, that's a very good thing. Just to keep in mind, if you are looking for answers to questions that you have online or anything like that, make sure whatever answer you come across that you're going to stick with is from a reputable source or something that's evidence-based or a credible source, such as Prevention First, American Heart Association, myself from Hamilton County Public Health, a reputable source that's around in your community, dealing with people like you, working with kids like your kids in your community. So just definitely make sure you have that in mind when you're looking at these, these online videos for answers. One of the other things it is do you think that the different flavors that have been distributed for vaping devices are directed towards adults or kids? And this is for the Mackenzie or Tatiana.
I would say like they're more directed towards kids, and I think that's obvious through like all people. Like most people see that. A lot of the ads that I see like against smoking, they're aiming it towards kids because they know that like a lot of kids are naive and like are susceptible to like getting addicted to these things. So I just think the different flavors that they have like are aimed towards kids and to make it more enjoyable, I guess, for them. But in reality, it's bad for you. So.
I mean, anything fruity I would like associate with kids or being a kid, or like that's just a taste that kids like. So
Also, another thing that I like to say is that if you're trying to quit, if you're using it as a cessation device and you're an adult, you don't need a cotton candy flavor to transition from a tobacco flavor. So that's definitely a tactic that was aimed at kids.
Yeah, and that's definitely one thing I want to touch on. I myself am a former tobacco user. I smoked for nearly 10 years. So I know going from smoking a pack a day of cigarettes to, wanting to quit, I'm not going to seek out something called unicorn vomit. I can guarantee you that. Unicorn poop is still way down on my list from tobacco or Virginia tobacco, or I would probably even go for menthol before unicorn poop, personally. So that's definitely something that's not going to be enticing to me as a tobacco user who's wanting to quit, who is also an adult, of course. So that's something to definitely keep in mind. And then also just kind of, I know I've spoken with a lot of kids in schools and things like that. One of the things that I get told a lot is how advertising in actual stores that people go into all the time, how the advertising is definitely more geared towards kids. So I know one of the stories that another youth I work with had told me is that when they walk into these stores, they'll see advertisements at their eye level. And these are sometimes middle schoolers that I'm working with. So you go into a regular, a convenience store, and there's an advertisement that's 3 foot off the floor. Your average adult is not 3 foot tall. However, your average middle schooler and elementary schooler is. So from early on, they're getting these, these impressionable messages, kind of just put into their mind of, well, there's a tobacco product, that's normal. I see every single day when I go into the store to get my candy or my soap or my candy or my soda or something like that. So they're seeing this every single day when they're going into their regular store around the corner from their home or something. So it begins to become normalized. And have you all experienced anything like that in your communities? Like, do you see advertising that's clearly targeted towards youth in your all stores that you go to?
Kind of based off like what she was saying earlier about like how it was so how it's sneaky, like basically how it looks just like what is that called, a flash drive. Like how it looks like a flash drive or it's in your hoodie. Like an adult doesn't need to hide it. Like an adult can do it freely if they want it to, but like a kid who is like younger and like knows that it's wrong, like it's sneaky for them. And so I think that's part of their marketing, of having it as something sneaky and easily hidden. So.
and then like ads on YouTube and even when your teacher's like, oh, do this assignment on school, like ads are always constantly popping up and very much targeted at us and what we want.
Yeah, just to touch on that, one of the things I have a lot of kids that I've worked with tell me is that they'll see a lot of posts on Instagram and Facebook as well as TikTok and things like that, people that are just promoting it, and they're just looking like they're a celebrity having a good time using a device, but in the end, we actually end up finding out that it's a paid advertisement by the vape company or the e-cigarette company. So what looks like, there's this girl that's, maybe very attractive, younger, having a great time on a beach partying is actually an advertisement that's been paid by that device to promote that advertisement. So again, it goes back into the peer pressure and wanting to get kids to feel like they're, included, or going into that inclusion feeling that kids want to feel that they're a part of something. So then they see these devices and then they get interested in trying them. I don't know if either of you all have any experience in regards to seeing advertisements like that.
Well, not exactly. Not exactly advertisements like that, but I was just gonna say like how you can see it in TikTok, like just regularly, like someone just vaping in a video, and those type of videos won't get reported or anything. But if you're a child who is against those things, I would just suggest that you do start reporting those things, because that's not good. You're basically, without reporting it, I see it as you're just letting that be okay in our environment, in our community. And so like if you just report it, or like you're speaking out about how it's wrong, and basically that'll just lower the sight of it, I guess, like it being so viral, and hopefully people stop doing it. Do you have anything?
Another parallel that I wanted to draw is that none of these tactics are new. They're just adapted with the times. All of these have been used by Big Tobacco before, and Big Tobacco plays a large part in Big Vape, I think you called it. I believe it's the owner of Marlboro cigarettes, has 35% ownership of Juul. So they absolutely have influence over what's happening. It's not new, and they are very sneaky about it now. So, yeah.
I had a quick question. First off, our Vikings are amazing. I appreciate you ladies up here.
They're amazing.
The question I have is, I know that the smoke from the vape doesn't last too long, but does secondhand smoke exist from vaping?
Sure, you can go ahead and take it.
All right. I feel like I've always saying we don't know, but I don't want to give you all information that is not valid. So, right, we don't necessarily know the impact of secondhand smoke from e-cigarettes yet. As I mentioned, the bad part about that is we have to wait until there are more respiratory issues. We have to wait until we get more research to identify that this is a direct correlation from secondhand smoke of e-cigarettes. Unfortunately, we do that after, but we are already, when I talk about that investment, that is so important, because if we don't find out now, it's going to be 20 years later before we identify that e-cigarettes, secondhand smoke, specifically from e-cigarettes, do cause respiratory issues in the future. I think the one I like to use, 2018, it was 1 in 20 youth were smoking, right? And then 2019, 1 in 4 youth are smoking e-cigarettes. And I missed the stat from 1999, it was 1 in 4 again. So we have seen this transition, and I like what you shared about this is not new, right? It's just changed the face, and it has social media too. So it's a lot more widespread. So we're just catching up in every aspect.
Just my opinion on that is, I know sometimes at my job, people will just vape real quickly, and even after they've walked away, you can go into that space and still smell the flavor. So I definitely think that there could be some secondhand smoke coming eventually that they find out about.
I agree.
That's
You're right.
just
You want
my
to do some
opinion.
research on it?
It's definitely visually, it's a lot less than a cigarette. Because there was a trip I was on, and there's a kid in the back of the bus, and just sitting there, it looked like a flash drive, but not a lot was coming out of it, so it wasn't a noticeable thing that got
And
stopped.
be honest, it smells good. You don't even know. I've smelled pink syrup. I've smelled cotton candy. If you don't know what it is, you're like, it smells like a little air freshener. You have no idea that this was someone smoking, especially since it disappears so fast. So my nose senses are still it smells like candy. Where is it at? And there's no candy. So.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, we finally got some other questions popped up here. The first one right now is, a lot of people utilize vaping as a substitute for smoking. Is it a safer option? So I believe we already kind of pretty much addressed that one earlier. So we'll move on to the next. what are the signs to look for vaping with teens? We also kind of addressed that earlier when it comes to nicotine addiction. And then also one of the things that I actually had a parent came up to me and told me this story. They went into their son's room while he had been studying for an exam. So he had exams coming up and he was studying for a few hours at a time. And they were cleaning up his room and they had realized that there were a bunch of empty plastic containers in his garbage can. So they didn't really think anything of it. They were emptying out the trash, putting everything in there. And they later found out that all of the empty canisters or any empty cartridges found out were actually vaping cartridges. So the child had been vaping about 3 to 4 pods an hour, which I'm not sure if, we haven't really touched on this, but the amount of nicotine in one pod on average is anywhere from 20 to 40 cigarettes worth of nicotine. So if this child was vaping about 3 to 4 pods in 1 hour, that is nearly 120 to 100, and I think 80. I can't do that much math in my head at once. About 120 to 180 cigarettes an hour worth of nicotine, of course. So if, I've done this lesson many a times and I've told that story before. And I always ask the youth, do you think you're going to be addicted after that point? And not a single one does not raise their hand. If you are smoking 120 cigarettes an hour, the equivalent's worth of nicotine, you are going to be addicted most likely after that point. And that's just something to keep into account. These things, they smell amazing. They don't taste that bad. They're easier to hide. They're much more addictive in nature than a regular traditional tobacco cigarette is. And they're easier to use because there's fewer policies in place to protect others and yourself actually from the actual devices. So just definitely make sure you definitely discuss these topics with your kids and with your friends and with your peers and things like that. The next question looks like it says, how come it isn't illegal to obviously target kids in vaping? So I'll have Dr. Hardy address this one.
Question. It's a great question. I wish it was illegal. But policies are hard, and I think the biggest, I don't want to get on a political soapbox on here. The biggest thing is companies have a lot of money, as we've realized, and they control a lot of industry and have a lot of influence because they're so large, and control a portion of the economy. I mean, we should have outlawed cigarettes a long time ago. We tax it, so we do a lot of things to keep people from buying. But those end up going on the consumer, right? So we increase taxes on cigarettes to keep people from smoking just cigarettes, right? Now we're trying to do the same thing with e-cigarettes. We're trying to increase the tax right now locally, within the state of Ohio. It is 10 cents per milliliter for the cartridge juice. Mm-hmm. So it does not count the actual device, but the juice, and we tax that on the wholesale, the person that's selling it and bringing it into the state, or I guess that's how that works, and then, or maybe the country. Sorry, my tariffs are not my thing. But however it's taxed, and then that ends up going on the consumer. It's worked for us for cigarettes, it has really helped us, but we can't wait to continue to tax till we get to 17% tax on cigarettes. We can't wait that long until we continue to try to increase the tax in order to invest more in prevention and education. We need to do it now so we don't have these problems 20 years from now. So why there's not a law, I don't have the answer for that. I think I will say it is really affecting youth directly, and we see these impacts of obviously children passing away from e-cigarettes. So I do think with a lot of legislators, I can only speak for the ones in the state of Ohio, are listening, which I think is great. And then there has been some federal work, but we have to really start to understand, provide the evidence-based research to our legislators as it's starting to come out, so we can really make the best policies where you can't advertise for cigarettes, or e-cigarettes, because we've done that before for cigarettes, right? We've eliminated, you can't do billboards anymore, you can't do any TV, you can't do TV radio. So we've done that before, but that took a long time. I mean, I would say majority of my childhood, I saw it, and then halfway through, I'm like, but at that point, I stopped smoking. We don't want these kids to be 10 years from now, and they're like, oh, we finally stopped getting rid of advertising for e-cigarettes. That's not what we want. So I think it's at every level, from the marketing, from our legislators, from research, from prevention, from our schools and education, from our local, all of that working together is how we'll get there.
And okay.
Something I wanted to add to that is the harm of social media in this case is that a lot of young people were doing the advertisements for them. So it was indirect, but they put up videos of them doing like vape tricks or, how to reload it.
Yes.
So a lot of the awareness came from youth themselves, and so that's something that's hard to put any policy on. But yeah, that's all I had to say on that.
No, that is completely true. So I will go ahead and move on to the next question really quick. So it's referring to how much does usage cost? So that's something to also keep in mind. If you're a kid out there and you're watching this video, or maybe you have a friend who's using one of these devices, it's not an inexpensive habit to pick up. If you start using one of these devices and you are one of the people who end up getting addicted to it and are feeling like you actually need it at that point, it's something that can cost you anywhere upwards to, $20 for a pack of 4 pods. That's extremely expensive. Any tobacco product is expensive, but that's something that could really, that could take your school money away, that could take your college money away, that could take your vacation money, your first car money away. So it's definitely something to keep in mind, just the cost of it. And then, does anybody else have anything to add to that? No?
Can I just add, you guys are awesome and keeping advocates for youth. And because we don't know the answers, I think the most powerful thing is really understanding what you need to support you in doing this work. So just thank you.
The only thing I would say to that last thing was don't buy from other kids. I have seen and heard people ask who wants to buy this jewel from me. That is wrong on so many levels. One, it's just unsanitary because they could have sicknesses, and just don't buy it anyway, and definitely don't buy it from other kids.
Okay, very quickly. Something to go along with that, if you do have friends that are using, the best thing you can do is support them in their, in wanting to quit. That's better than, shaming them for it. Just, extend your support for them and point them towards any resources you know about.
And that was actually the next topic I was going to bring up. No, you're perfectly fine. So the one thing that I definitely want to refer to back before is, don't ever be pro-tobacco or anti-tobacco. Of course, you can voice your opinion to your friends and things, but in the end, just provide the information that you can for your kids, for your community members, for your students, for your patients, whoever it is you're working with, and then just make sure they are informed in all their decisions that they're making. And then if you are, a friend or a colleague or a parent of somebody who is using these devices, let them know that you are there to support them. And that one of the ways that we have tried to promote that greatly with youth is utilizing the My Life, My Quit program. So the My Life, My Quit program is actually a program that can be completed completely via text. It is a program that helps youth who are currently addicted to these products actually get off of the product. So as Dr. Hardy mentioned earlier, there are not any nicotine replacement devices or replacement medicines or medications for youth. So if you're under the age of 18, you cannot get any of those most of the time by prescription or even over the counter. So one of the ways we've combated that is provided guided counseling via text, online chat. You can call them up if you really want to. And the My Life, My Quit program was actually developed with the help of youth. And it is confidential. You do not need parent permission. It's for 13 to 17-year-olds. So I definitely highly recommend promoting that to your friends and to your kids if you know anybody who actually is in need of it as well. So I think that's going to be the wrapping up of our panel discussion and the lovely youth attending here. We just kind of want to make sure we say thank you to everybody. So first I would love to say thank you for the help from our lovely high school seniors here. Please give them a round of applause. And then, of course, I want to say thank you to the panelists for joining us all here today and joining beside me and helping to provide all this information to the community members out there, and to Princeton School District for reaching out and having us perform this kind of panel discussion and community forum for you all, as well as ICRC-TV for coming and actually doing a live production and helping us to get all this information out to the community. And basically, we just want to thank you all as well as audience, and those if you're attending online, if you're participating there with questions. We just want to thank everybody out there, and please do not hesitate to reach out to somebody and get the information that you need answered. So thank you all.
I just wanted to, thank you, Jason. I just wanted to close again. Jessica has been after